Bereshis, and it's true every time. We learn about the career of Yosef. In a way, the focus of attention passes from Yaakov to Yosef, and that is implied really in the second pasuk. So let's get right underway. We're on page, if you're with me in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, page 198, which is beginning of chapter 37, Lamed Zayin. VaYeshev Yaakov be'eretz Megorei Aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. And then the next pasuk right away says, Eila told us Yaakov, these are the generations of Yaakov, of which Yosef is the primary vehicle through which Yaakov's destiny unfolded or unraveled, we could say as well. Yosef ben Shras Shana, he was 17 years old. He assisted his brothers, his older brothers, with the flock. I mean, I said he assisted them. He was a kind of adjunct to their work in the shepherding business, because the Torah implies, as we'll see right away, that actually Yaakov spent a lot of time with Yosef, more time with Yosef than with his other siblings. And therefore, although it says Haya Ro'es Echav Batson, but possibly he was still younger. Well, he certainly was younger than them, and he participated, but maybe he was also an observer, and he didn't like the things that he observed, and he told his father all about it. Let's read the next half of that pasuk. He would especially perhaps spend time with the sons of the maidservants who were regarded as perhaps second tier within the family. And Yosef brought a critical, maybe a deleterious report about them to his father. And that is by way of context. Of course, it's very well known. The next pasuk, there was the one I want to explore together. VaYosef v'Yisrael, pasuk Gimel. Yeah, it's pasuk Gimel, though the little Gimel there is in the wrong place. The little Gimel here on the art scroll, maybe you've got a corrected version. Anyway, should be one line up. V'Yisrael ahaves Yosef mikol banav ki ben zukunim hu lo. Israel, that is to say, Yaakov loved Yosef more than his other sons because he was the son of his old age. Va'asalo kesones pasim, and he made for him a fine woolen tunic. Kesones is a tunic. Pasim implies that it was made of fine wool. The word pasim also means striped, and that is the source of the little title we've given our shir tonight, Technicolor Dreamcoat, which of course has been borrowed from the hit musical. So Yosef is the favorite son, and the fact that he is the favorite son of his father is evident. Yaakov almost broadcasts it by giving him a particular special tunic, which others don't have. So it's quite evident that Yaakov is favoring Yosef. Of course, as we know, that ultimately is the undoing of Yaakov and of Yosef. And perhaps there is an object lesson for parents right there, according to Chazal. A person should not make that error of favoring one child over another. Okay.
Okay, I'll come.
Excuse me? Okay, so now, so far, so familiar, but I want to explore together what haTurim teaches us about that expression, ben zukunim. So Rashi already says that ben zukunim, the simple understanding is that Yosef, is the son of Yaakov's old age. And it's true that of all the 12 sons of Yaakov, Yosef is nearly the youngest. And he is the firstborn to Rachel, who is Yaakov's favorite wife. He is Yaakov's only wife whom he actually chose. She was barren for a long time. When she finally conceived and gave birth, it was no doubt a source of enormous satisfaction and pride to Yaakov. And perhaps it's not surprising that he loved Yosef, especially because of that. And although Binyamin came on the scene a few years later, but then again, Benjamin, in a way, was responsible for his mother's death. Not through any fault of his own, but when he came into the world, his birth was more than his mother could bear, literally, and she died in childbirth. So perhaps Yaakov always felt that Benjamin, although I'm sure he loved him very much, we know that he loved him from later on in the Parasha, but perhaps he felt a little bit ambivalent or conflicted whenever he thought of Binyamin, he also thought of the death of his beloved wife. in any case, that's the background to it. Rashi says Ben Zukuni means the son of his old age, but the word zakein in the rabbinic interpretation is often associated with wisdom. Zeh shekana chachma. The word zakein means elderly, but it's very frequently used in the sense of the one who is wise, who is prominent, who is an advisor, who is a counselor, who is, let's say, experienced, but also connotes like not just wisdom, but uh, a repository of Torah knowledge as well. So Rashi mentions that he was the son to whom Yaakov conveyed the largest amount of Torah. But the interesting thing is, Rashi says the Torah that he learned from Shem ve'Aver he conveyed to Yosef. So that much is in Rashi, but haTurim finds a further remez to that. The word zikun, you can see how it's written here in the Torah in the last line, if you're with me in the art scroll. In any case, it's pasuk gimel kiben zukunim. It's spelled without the vav, the chaser vav. So when we read the word zikunim without the vav, it could, and it normally would be rendered zikenim, ben zikenim. Zikenim means the elders or the wise or both. So says Baal HaTurim, that hints to what Rashi tells us, that Yaakov conveyed to Yosef not just Torah in general, not that the Torah had yet been given, but not only the repository of wisdom that Yaakov was able to transmit to Yosef in a general sense, but particularly the wisdom of the elders. Who are the Zekanim? So the Zekanim refers to those who taught Yaakov. Now, of course, no doubt, Yaakov learned from Yitzchak and Yaakov learned from Avraham. Avraham died when Yaakov was 15 years old. And I'm sure that as an astute and precocious student, Yaakov probably learned quite a lot from his grandfather Avraham, even though he died when Yaakov was 15. But Yaakov would have certainly learned from Yitzchak. After all, when Esav was out in the field hunting and that sort of thing, Yaakov was Yoshev Ohalim. He was cultivating the inner life, the life of the spirit. So Yaakov grew up in the home of Avraham, and then subsequently, certainly in the home of his father Yitzchak. So we might wonder, why does the Rashi say that the Torah that Yaakov conveyed to Esav was specifically the Torah of Shem ve'Aver? Now, we know by tradition that Yaakov went to study in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver. I mean, the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver is not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. And certainly it's not mentioned that Yaakov studied there. But we have a tradition about that. We've mentioned in the past that Yaakov actually studied for 14 years en route to Haran in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver. So that's hinted to in the word zikunim, which is zikanim, that he conveyed to Yosef what he learned from Shem ve'Aver. The question is, and I hope you're thinking of that question already, what is deficient in the Torah of Avraham and Yitzchak that would prompt Rashi to explain that Yaakov conveyed to Yosef the Torah of the Zekanim, according to Baal HaTurim, the remez is the Kenim Shem ve'Aver. Why go back to the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver and the teaching of Shem ve'Aver? What about the yeshiva of Avraham and Yitzchak? At the end of the day, Shem was the son of Noach. He was a righteous person. Aver was the great-grandson of Shem, generations later. We don't really know that much about him, according to what the Torah tells us. Even Shem, we don't know that much about him, just that he was more worthy than Ham and Yafes. Avraham and Yitzchak, the Jewish world, and maybe the world itself, is built on the foundation of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So why does Rashi reach to the rabbinic tradition to say that Yaakov transmitted to Yosef the teachings that he gleaned at the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver? Those are the Zekanim. Why is that necessary? Meaning, why not just say the Torah he transmitted, which came from Avram, came from Yitzchak, may have come from Shem ve'Aver as well? Just very briefly, what was the curriculum in that yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver? The truth is, there's quite a lot that they could learn. Even though the Torah had not yet been given, they can learn about ethics, morality. They can learn about the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. They can learn about philosophy. They can study the means by which to establish a just and equitable society, a code of law regulating human interaction. There's plenty that they can, and no doubt they did study and explore and teach in that yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, even though the Torah, of course, as we know, it had not yet been given. But that's just parenthetically. I want to share with you what Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says. He poses this question, and he answers as follows. Shem, and then his great-grandson, Aver, represented surviving in a hostile environment, in an environment that was spiritually toxic and degenerate. Shem, of course, was one of the three sons of Noah through whom the world was rebuilt. Shem would have experienced the time in the ark of Noah during the flood, and Shem would have lived for hundreds of years. Actually, not hundreds of years, because I think Noah only fathered children late in life, but even so, Shem would have grown up in the world in its most degenerate state when it was destined to be completely destroyed. Shem survived the flood on the ark, and Shem rebuilt the world subsequently. But as we know, the world quickly descended once again to idolatry. Shem and Aver, who was his descendant, symbolize the ability to retain one's religious and moral and spiritual integrity in a hostile environment, in an environment where there's very little support, where there's very little validation for that kind of lifestyle, and where the influences are completely corrosive and insidious. The Torah of Shem Ve'ever, in a phrase, is the Torah of Galus. Yitzchak lived all his life in the land of Israel. Now, it's true that Canaan, he was in the land of the Plishtim a bit as well, also was not a spiritually supportive environment. But then again, Yitzchak grew up under the care and influence of his father Abraham. Yitzchak never even went to find a wife. They brought a wife to him. So Yitzchak had the benefit of being raised in an environment that was probably spiritually charged at an exalted level. Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov represent the foundations of what's called Olam HaTikun in the Kabbalistic literature. The point is that they nurtured in Yaakov a sense of spiritual greatness and potential. But Yaakov also needs the Torah of Galus, and that's why he studied in that yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, according to rabbinic tradition, for 14 years when he left the land of Israel, when he went to Haran, before he went to Haran, because he learned there about the Torah of Galus, the Torah that enables a person to retain his integrity in exile. Yosef needed the same thing. Yosef also, as we know, went into exile at the age of 17, and he didn't have the benefit of the support of his family, not his parents, not his brothers, as of course the Torah describes later on. And even though Al Derech HaPshat, Yaakov did not know about that, and he certainly did not anticipate it, Al Derech HaPshat, but at a deeper level, perhaps he somehow did have a premonition about that. And in any case, he was aware of the prophecy to Abraham that his descendants will be exiled in a foreign land. He transmitted to Yosef the mantle of leadership for the Jewish, I was going to say nation, but it wasn't yet a nation, but the Jewish extended family. He was, like we just said, Ben Zekunim. So therefore, Yaakov would have felt the need to prepare Yosef for leadership in exile. And that's why he taught him the Torah of Shem Ve'ever, which is the Torah of Galus, the Torah of exile. This is the chidush, or the explanation of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, which I think is very beautiful. So again, the haTurim is the one who points out the remez Ben Zikuni without the Vav. It was like Ben Zikanim, and the Zikanim were Shem and Ever. By the way, they lived hundreds and hundreds of years, much longer than Abraham lived, Yitzchak lived, Yaakov lived. And in that sense, they were Zikanim, although actually, just for the sake of precision, when Yaakov was in that yeshiva, Shem had already died. Shem died a few decades before Yaakov arrived in that yeshiva. So it was still called the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. Um, he would have learned about the teachings of Shem, through Aver. Um, I have a good friend called Rabbi Yerachmiel Fried, and he's the Rosh Kollel in Dallas, Texas. He's a big Talmid Chacham. And many years ago, he became very taken with the writings of Rav Hutner. And he told me that he considers himself a posthumous Talmid of Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who wrote Pachad Yitzchak. He never met him. He met a number of his Talmidim, but he never met Rav Hutner. He said, I'm a posthumous Talmid of Rav Hutner. So Yaakov Avinu was a posthumous Talmid of Shem, and he was a Talmid of Aver in that yeshiva. That's what he transmitted to Yosef. Let's talk now about the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Kesones Pasim. So this word pasim is a bit ambiguous in its meaning. Rashi says, I think, more than one suggestion. Rashi says clay milas, which is a fine woolen tunic. And the other possibility is that there's a reference to Al Shem Tsarosav, his troubles, because he was sold repeatedly. So the pasim is a remez to Potiphar, Socharim, Yishmaelim, Midyanim. So the word pasim has that remez. The word pasim also means striped. That's probably the simplest understanding is a striped coat, tunic, which was especially identifiable for that reason. haTurim finds a few beautiful ramazim. He says the word pasim, Kesones pasim, has the gematria of 190. 190 is an important gematria. It's gematria of the word kates, kuf tzadi. Kates means the end. We have, like it says about also the flood, kates kol basar balafana. Hashem said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me. Kates means the end. It's the frontier, the continuity of all flesh has come to an end. It's only to this point and no further. It's too corrupt, too degenerate, and Hashem decides he tells Noach he has to destroy the entire world. That's where kates. Kates also is used. We'll get to that in one moment. So the first thing haTurim says is it's a remez that he that it indicates that Yaakov revealed to Yosef the fact that he will be exiled to Egypt. Kates also means the end of the exile. We find that word very often, legalos es hakates. We find in Parshas Vayechi, Rashi says that Yaakov wanted or intended or let's say was hoping to be able to reveal the kates. The kates is the end of the exile. That could mean that it's a remez to the end of the exile in Egypt, the Egyptian exile, but it could also mean the end of the exile itself, that is to say, the time of the redemption. But we'll get to that in one moment. So haTurim says that Pasim is Gematria 190. So he hinted to Yosef that Yosef is going to go into exile. And the Jewish people, the Jewish tribe, the Jewish extended family will also go into exile as a result. Of course, as we know, as the Torah describes later on. They'll all be exiled to Mitzrayim. And even though it will be a long and bitter exile, but it will be 190 years shorter than the original prophecy, because Hashem prophesied, or Hashem revealed to Abraham. Hashem gave the prophecy to Abraham that his descendants will be exiles for 400 years. And in the end, they were only exiled in Mitzrayim for 210 years. Gematria, redu, go down, Resh Dalet Vav. So they were in Mitzrayim for 210 years, which was a discount, if you like, of 190 years. So he hinted to Yosef, the exile of 400 years is going to be diminished by 190 years. But it could also mean, as I said, that he revealed. The word kates also hints to the revelation of the end of the Egyptian exile, or possibly, and I think more maybe, in a more profound way, he revealed to him the end of the exile of the world as we know it. Yosef has not, let's say, conspicuously conveyed that secret to anyone else. So this is the word Kates and the Gematria Kuf Tzadi. But he says there's something else as well, a beautiful Gematria within the name, within the word Pasim. So Yosef himself lived to the age of 190. Actually, he died before all of his other brothers. The other brothers lived longer. He died at the age of 110, the Torah says. And possibly that's because he, although he was righteous and humble and all of that, but he did exercise temporal authority. Perhaps that's why he died at a somewhat younger age. In any case, the word pasim consists of the letter Pei, which is 80, and then Samach Yud Mem, which is gematria 100, gematria, 110. So the remez is, how old was Yosef when he was elevated from the pit? The answer is he was 30 years old. The Torah says he was 30 years old when he stood before Paro. And he lived and he lived until the age of 110, which means he ruled for 80 years. He ruled in his role as the viceroy for a long time, for 80 years. So Pasim is 80 plus Samach Yud Mem, 88, I'm sorry, not really plus, but 80 of 110 years he was in the role of the king. So Pasim is 80 years on the throne or as the viceroy of the 110 years which he lived altogether. This is what I wanted to share with you about the opening passage, but there's a fascinating further separate chapter. I mean, it is actually literally a chapter, even though we've mentioned many times that the chapters of the Torah, also the Nevi'im and the writings, Tanakh generally, are not actually of Jewish origins. The only exception is Tehillim. The chapters of Tehillim are of Jewish origin. I think Shir HaShirim is the other exception. But all the other books of Tanakh, including the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, etc., the division into chapters is a Christian device, which, because of its utility, has become pretty much universal in the Jewish world as well. But it's not originally of Jewish like formulation. But in any case, we have chapter 38, and this is the story of Yehuda and Tamar. It starts in Art Scroll on page 208, and the story continues until page 212, and that is where I'd like you to turn, please, if you're with me in the Art Scroll. In any case, whatever Chumash you use, if you look at chapter 38, verse 29. So it's towards the end of that chapter. Tamar has become pregnant. She's become pregnant through Yehuda, not by Yehuda's intent, or at least not with his evident awareness, although it was all part, no doubt, of the divine plan. And it certainly was part of Tamar's plan, because she conspired to become pregnant through him. And of course, she her pregnancy became apparent, and when it became apparent, she was suspected of promiscuity, because although she was not married, but she was widowed, and she was supposed to or expected to wait for her young brother-in-law to come of age, which he did come of age, but there was no indication that she would have an opportunity to marry him, because her husband had died, and her husband's brother also died. And she greatly desired to become she was married to the family of Yehuda, but the opportunity to marry Sheila was not evidently forthcoming. In any case, she became pregnant. She was prepared to suffer execution rather than shame Yehuda as the father of the baby within her womb, the fetus within her womb. Ultimately, Yehuda himself admitted that he was responsible. And in any case, the Torah continues and the chapter ends with the fact that she gave birth not to one boy, but to 2. So the Torah says in Pasuk Chavtes, Vayhi kimeshiv yado. Actually, let's start on Pasuk Chav Zayin 27. Vahi basically the Tabinei Somi Bevitna. When she began to give birth, it was evident that she had twins. Vahi the Tavi Ten Yad. When she was in active labor, Vayitain Yad seems to be the embryo, the fetus extended his hand. Whether this could actually happen, I've read an essay, not sure how practical that is, but perhaps so. The Torah describes it as if it happened that way. So the midwife took a thread and v'tikshor al yado shani, and she tied a red thread to his hand, to his arm. Lemor zeyat sarishana, he's the firstborn, because she thought he's going to come out and they could easily get the two infants confused. So she marked the newborn, the elder one, in that way. But it didn't actually work out quite like that. But then the baby brought his hand back in within the womb. And his brother came out first. The brother actually sort of overtook the first one. Vatomer, and the midwife said, "Ma paratzta alecha peretz." You've burst forth. Vayikra Shemo Paretz, and he, probably Yehuda, called his name Peretz. Then his brother came out. That is to say, well, it says right away, Asher al Yado Hashani, the one on whose hand the scarlet thread was tied. Vayikra Shemo Zarach, and she called him Zarach. Zarach means to shine forth, and Peretz means to burst forth. Okay, that's what the Torah says. So haTurim explains that this Peretz is a very important personality in the future of Jewish history. We don't really know that much about him as an individual, but we follow his progeny. He is the son of Yehuda and Tamar. He is the firstborn, although he emerged first, so to speak, by overtaking Zerach, his brother. And he will ultimately be the progenitor of David HaMelech. And all the Davidic kings will therefore be descended from Peretz. And ultimately, Mashiach himself will be descended from Peretz as well. It says, haTurim, ma paratzta alecha Peretz. This word Peretz, the name Peretz, and that was given to him. He says there's a remez to David. How do you spell David? Usually it's spelled Dalid Vav Dalid. The gematria of Dalit Vav Dalit is 14, not difficult to calculate. What does Peretz and David have to do with one another in gematria? Atbash. Says haTurim using the Atbash method. You know, Atbash is where Aleph and Taf are interchanged. The first and the last letters of the alphabet are interchanged. Bet and Shin. So when you see a name or a word like Av in Hebrew, so in the Atbash rendition, it's equal to Taf Shin. So the word, or rather the name Peretz, in Atbash, the corresponding letters in the second half of the alphabet are Vav, Gimel, Hey. In Atbash, Peretz is Vav, Gimel, Hey, which is 14, which is the gematria of David. So Peretz has a gematria of David. And he says also, like the Pasuk says, Melech Poretz Geder, that a king has the authority to knock down the wall of a commoner in order to make a path for himself, and no one can prevent him from doing so. A king has that authority. Perhaps he has to compensate the one whose fence has been ruined, but he has the authority to do so, presumably not on a whim, or maybe even so on a whim, but for purposes of national importance. But technically, Melech Poretz Geder. So this is a remez to Mashiach as well. Mashiach will be the one who will burst forth, in other words, in an unexpected way. Mashiach will not be the product of a publicity campaign or billboards or a kind of vox populi method in which people will somehow agitate for Mashiach or identify a certain person, by popular acclaim. Rather, Mashiach will arrive and will burst forth in an unexpected manner. And This is the nature of Mashiach and the nature of Peretz, which is to burst forth. But there's something much deeper here as well. Baal haTurim doesn't go beyond that, but I want to share with you in the last minute or two what I saw in Rabbeinu Bachaya. Rabbeinu Bachaya says that Peretz is a remez to the moon, because the moon itself is sometimes banui, it's built up and it's complete, itim parutz, and other times it's broken down. When you look at the moon in the middle of the month, we had just a few days ago the middle of the month, and the moon, we had one night that I can recall this month after days and days and nights of fog and clouds, when the moon was brightly visible. It was a pleasure to gaze upon. That is when the moon is full. But most of the time, the moon is parutz. The moon is broken down, so to speak. That's why the Jewish people, and especially Malchus Beis David, are likened to the moon. Rabbeinu Bachaya says that the family lineage of David HaMelech corresponds to the days of the moon. The cycle of the moon is 30 days. He says that from Avraham until Shlomo HaMelech are 15 generations. Avraham, like the pasuk says, that mi heir mi mizrach, who is shining forth from the east. So that's a reference to Avraham. Shining forth, it means that, like Avraham, is the moon when it's just beginning to grow from a dark night. The first glimmer of the moon, that's Avraham. And then generation after generation, although it may not have been a completely linear progression, but there are 15 generations from Avraham until Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech, from the word shalem, the moon is full. When Shlomo HaMelech is on the throne, that is the apogee of the Malchus Beis David. But from that point, from Shlomo HaMelech, there are 15 more generations of kings, Pochasim v'Holchim, that diminish. You probably know that of the 15 generations from King Solomon until the last of the Davidic kings, many of them were idolaters, many of them were scoundrels, some of them were among the worst villains that Jewish history has recorded. There are 15 generations until Tzidkiah, although he had a nice name, Tzidkiah, but he himself was not righteous, he was not a tzaddik, and it was Tzidkiah who was the last generation of the Davidic kings. Nebuchadnezzar captured him with his sons, slaughtered his sons before his eyes, and then blinded him. So the last recollection, the last thing that he saw was his sons being murdered, a very sadistic form of punishment meted out by the wicked Nebuchadnezzar. So Tzidkiah, his eyes were blinded, and that's like lights out. The moon, from Avraham, 15 generations, to Shlomo, full moon, from Shlomo, 15 generations until the lights are out. But the moon is never out for long. When the moon is dark, when the sky is without the illumination of the moon, wait a day, wait a night, and another night, and the moon begins to grow again. This is the nature of the moon in contrast to the sun. That's why Zerach, to shine, is like the sun. The sun is always shining. Sometimes we can't see it if it's cloudy. But the moon, and the truth is the moon is always there as well, but the moon is not illuminated. The moon is not a source of light. The moon reflects the light. But the moon, as we know, waxes and wanes from the beginning of time until today. This is the remez, this is the metaphor for Malchus Beis David, which waxes and wanes. And the Jewish people collectively are like that as well, that our fortunes wax and wane. Or to put it differently, our enemies and circumstances seemingly conspire against us, so that the possibility of a revival is completely beyond the realm of reasonable expectation. And yet the Jews are history's ultimate comeback kid. Just as the moon waxes and wanes and always makes a comeback, the Jewish people as well. And this is personified, exemplified by Malchus Beis David, of which Peretz is the progenitor. Parasha alecha Peretz. So all of this is the elaboration of Rabbeinu Bachaya on that association of Peretz pertinent to Mashiach, pertinent to David HaMelech. By the way, King David was 14 generations from Abraham. Shlomo was the 15th generation. David HaMelech, Gematria Yud Dalet 14, was 14 generations from Abraham until David HaMelech. Shlomo, as I said, was the apogee, the 15, and from then, unfortunately, it was downhill. But in the future, ultimately, and that's why, of course, we say, and when we say Kiddush Tavana, we mention Malchus Beis David, but that's taking us a bit far afield. So we'll stop here. It's already beyond our 30-minute allocation. And I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos. We're going to be in recess, even though there's fascinating, captivating parshas to come. But we will be in recess for 2 weeks. So Ruthie and I are going to be away. So next Thursday and the following Thursday, we will be in recess. But we will be back for Parshas Vayechi on Thursday. I think it's the 9th, I believe, of January. So we look forward to seeing you then. I wish everyone a wonderful Hanukkah, a luminous Hanukkah, and in Hashem, only good news. We'll hear from one another, and wish you a wonderful Shabbos.